Well, I feel like, because just this complete transparency about it, that I've had to learn how to be, you know, a Christian sports fan, if that makes sense. Uh, because in the true sense of the word, I do consider myself a fan, but at the same time, I'm not in the true sense of the word a fanatic. But there's a
You
line.
understand why I used the word fanatic, though. I wasn't
Yeah,
attacking you.
absolutely. But there's definitely, as a Christian, I believe it can be, and this could be a whole nother conversation, but it's something that you have to learn to navigate.
All right, welcome everybody to the next episode of Pastors React. This is a new series we're trying where I get a special guest to come in and join me, and we take the opportunity to react to a very specific subject, something that we don't necessarily want to spend time in a pulpit preaching about, but things we want to talk about. Sometimes it's political stuff, sometimes it's society. It's just different things that get our attention, and we feel like we need to talk about this a little bit, or at least they get my attention, and then I drag somebody else into the conversation. And so with me today, I'm dragging Brother Jesse Haley into this. Everybody from our channel will know Brother Haley because he's been a part of pretty much everything we've done till now. I asked Brother Haley to join me for this because I was going through Facebook, and I don't get on there a lot, but just enough that I happened to cut on Facebook the day after the Dallas Cowboys had won a football game. And my Facebook was bombarded with Cowboys, Cowboys, Cowboys. And just for anybody's sake, I mean, if I rooted for a football team, it would have been the Cowboys. That was my team growing up my entire life, so that was fine. But I just haven't cared about it for a long time. So I don't count myself as a Cowboys fan, but I'm definitely not their enemy in the sense that if I had to put my support behind a team, I guess it would be them. I used to have the Cowboys blankets and all this kind of stuff as a kid. So don't think this is me as somebody who's a fan of another team taking a chance to attack the Cowboys. What triggered me for this conversation, I felt like this was something we're talking about, was this one particular pastor, a friend of mine who was a huge Cowboys fan, that day after they had won that game, which he had started posting a lot of memes about the Cowboys, and in particular, he had posted one about Micah Parsons. Like I say, this is a guy who preaches against tattoos. I've heard him preach against them. I know that he preaches against them, but he's posting all these pictures. And one particular article praising this guy as how he's the greatest player in this sense, and he set this record and whatnot. And I'm just looking at this picture of this guy, both arms in the air. And I'm not judging him as a person. It's just that, both arms in the air covered in tattoos. Now, the reason why that stood out to me is because you have this pastor who preaches against it. But then his Facebook has 5 different posts, all featuring the same guy, one from wrist to shoulder covered in tattoos. And he wouldn't. I mean, I couldn't make it to his Facebook if I looked like that. I wouldn't get posted on his wall. There's a standard there, but it didn't apply when it was requiring that Micah Parsons, this new linebacker, had to have it applied to him. And what that brought for me was just it bothered me because I began to look at that and think about that it's sending off a mixed signal at the very least. That you as a pastor, you're preaching against something, you're telling your congregation this is wrong, you can't do this, but then you're throwing somebody out there as a hero because they can do really well while holding a ball or whatever. That you're putting them up as a hero because they're a good athlete, and it's okay for them. And that's what really brought this conversation on, that I wanted to talk about this, that I think there is a lot of hypocrisy in that. Now, I've asked Brother Haley to talk with me about it because I don't see that in his. He's a big sports fan. I know you're Atlanta Braves, right?
Yes.
That's your big team that I know you're behind.
Yeah,
is
sure.
the Braves.
Yeah. World champions this year, or Yeah, 2021. Yeah.
But like I know you use sports metaphors a lot of times, like in your messages. I see like the post for your church that you'll use like a picture of a referee or something a lot of times, and you'll
Yeah.
use a sports metaphor. So I know you like sports. I know also I remember back when we first met, it was like right after that was when you decided you wanted to start taking your kids to some of the baseball games. So you went out as a family
Oh,
and
yes.
traveled around to see some of the games. And
Hmm.
I'm not against any of that kind of stuff. I'm not against having a team you like. I'm not against being in the sportsmanship. I'm not against using the metaphors because, I mean, even in the Bible, you have that. I mean, the
Hmm.
Bible uses quite a few of them. You have the runner, you have the wrestler, but you have sports metaphors in the Bible. So I'm not against the use of those things. I'm not against people who enjoy sports. I've always enjoyed playing sports more so than watching. I've never been somebody who could enjoy watching. When I played football, I enjoyed that. But if I had to watch a game, I was miserable. For example, I liked boxing until I got my lip busted and had to preach a revival. I liked sports. I like the sportsmanship, the competitiveness of it. I like all of that. So I'm not critical of people who enjoy sports. I just feel like there's an issue to be discussed in this thing of people who are willing to turn a blind eye to certain things, who are willing to lift up and celebrate as celebrities, celebrities or athletes, just because they're good at something, even though they themselves are completely against what the man is preaching from the pulpit or what his standards are. And I feel like it's a big issue because I think it sends off mixed signals to a congregation. I think it hurts a man's message when he does that. I know for me personally, it hurt my opinion of this pastor, who I still respect him, but it hurt my opinion of him once that suddenly just clicked what I was seeing when I was looking at those things. So now, Brother Haley, you know what I've dragged you into.
Yeah.
This your chance to abandon ship if you don't want to be a part of it.
Well, if it's a chance to pounce on the Cowboys, I'm all in on that. But I know that's not what you're doing. But I grew up a Redskins fan, and
Oh man.
yeah, so it's just, and it's interesting since then. I mean, I still pull for now the Washington football team, but really, one thing that I didn't lose is I don't follow the Redskins as closely, but I still love to see the Cowboys lose and and all that. So and they are one of the more polarizing teams. You don't find too many people on the fence with them. They're definitely a team that you either kind of love or hate. But uh, yeah, no, that's a very, very interesting perspective there, because it brings in specifically that idea of lifting up the individuals. And I believe across the line, when it comes to sports, there really are some things that I believe Christians really have to be on guard about. I mean, I've seen it with myself. Without you telling me the topic, I was prepared to talk about, things about the idolization of sports in general. And this pastor, it's not like he's idolizing that guy. That's not your point. But what I was just thinking about idolizing and things like that, that's a thing that you got to be careful with sports. You can really get so invested in that it can be set up almost like an idol in your life. It can be a troublesome thing.
Let me go ahead and bring up let me give you a second while I bring up some of my examples of what I'm talking about. That way you see a little better, not just the verbal reference to it. Because I'm just really want to explain why I've brought up this conversation, why I've picked you in particulars of my friends to talk to about, is because I think you can represent that side of people who do, you do care about sports. It is something,
Mhm.
when you picked something you wanted to spend with your daughters before they got old enough they'd be moving out, this was the
Yeah.
thing you enjoyed. So I think you can come from that side and bring a fair and balanced view of it. Where at the same time, I respect you as a preacher, that I think you can also, acknowledge the problems. So
Yeah.
that's why I've asked you to do this. I've asked you for that
Yeah.
reason.
Yeah. Yeah. And sitting here talking, I'm thinking of some better ways to address this too.
Well, here, let me bring up my thing I put together for this, some examples of what I'm talking about. So my question is, and sadly, this program messes up my slideshow, so now it looks ugly. But my question is: should Christians glorify celebrities and athletes? Should we do that? Is it something that's acceptable for us to do? And so I have the post here, the first one that got my attention about Micah
Okay.
Parsons, which I've included on the next slide a quote from Micah Parsons, because I don't want people to think I necessarily have a huge issue with him individually. I have an issue with Christians heaping praise upon any celebrity or athlete even some of the ones who identify as Christian to some degree. I mean, there's a limit to this thing. I'm not making a blanket statement.
Yeah.
But the post says Micah Parsons has 13 sacks and 79 tackles this year. He's the only NFL player to do this over the last 9 NFL seasons. Not just the only rookie, the only player. My goodness. And then you see 7 likes, 13 comments, and that was just the day it happened. I had already taken this picture. For me, I'm looking at it, though, and the thing was I didn't care that he was excited about one of the players on his team. I just was bothered by the fact that the standards that he would apply to anyone else didn't apply to this person.
Yeah.
And that's why I've included the quote here at the bottom. It says, I wrote unto you in an epistle not to company with fornicators, yet not altogether with the fornicators of this world, or with the covetous, or extortioners, or with idolaters, for then you must needs go out of the world. So I've included this quote because it is a warning by Paul that you're not going to be able to escape everything, in this world, but to just be careful who you keep company with, people who represent things that the Bible calls evil.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm saying that because, especially as a pastor, we have a great deal of influence and power. As a pastor, as a father, as any of these positions. I mean, the man in particular I'm talking about, I think he's probably at least a grandfather, if not a great grandfather by this point. So he has generations of influence in that sense. Very well respected and well known pastor, songwriter, all kinds of stuff. So he's a man with a lot of influence. And he's using it to promote people who represent a lifestyle that he preaches against.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what, for me, like I say, once I give a little more perspective as to why it was an issue, that's what to me is the issue. Now, I'll show you some more of the post. That way you see more of what I'm looking at here. Now, the church member meme is from me, but you have the 3 other posts here on the side are all from the same day from the same guy. Like that's why, like for me, for a long time, I haven't needed to follow sports because I know what the Cowboys are doing. If I cut on Facebook for 5 seconds on a Monday, Absolutely. I know what the Cowboys have done this year. So I haven't needed to follow them as a team. But you have, if you just look at the pictures, you'll find, without even knowing these guys' lifestyle, you'll start to find things that he preaches against. Men having long hair, tattoos, stuff like that may not be the end-all be-all issues, but he preaches against it. Yeah. And then you put it on your Facebook, and at some point that does go across the line into hypocrisy. You cross a line to where you undermine your own message, and you don't mean to. I know this guy. I don't believe at all that's his intention. I don't think he means anything bad at all by his post. But without meaning to, you can still do things that are bad or undermine your message. Right. And that's why I've included this quote from Micah Parsons, who he at least censored it himself, so I didn't have to blur it out. But it says, turn on the film, turn the film on. I really put my heart into this. And it's a response. I think Troy Aikman said something. One of the former, quarterbacks said something bad about him that, that his team would have done better or something like that. And he's responding to him. So I understand he was mad. I will give him that. I understand there was passion in what he was saying. But you have a man who, at the very least, has foul language, the tattoos and stuff like that without knowing anything about his life at all. And he's a professional athlete. You don't have to go deep into assuming if you go into his life, there's going to be a lot of stuff there that goes against what that preacher's preaching from his pulpit. So, and this is actually why I included the meme as well about if church members were this faithful sitting in the snow like that, was because of what you were talking about, the praise that gets heaped upon sports in general many times, the fact that it becomes an idol to a lot of people.
Well, and I think, a couple of things that come up to me in this, honestly, it's hard for me to get past the consistency issue, which I think has been a problem with, I'm independent Baptist, so I just want to say independent Baptist for a long time that, again, if you feel strongly that the Bible condemns tattoos, period, and that's what you preach versus, another side of it, which is bringing up a whole other thing. I don't want to debate tattoos, but is it that the Bible clearly condemns having a tattoo in black and white, or is it a thing to where it's like, look, okay, maybe you could debate tattoo issue in general, but in our society, as far as the testimony is concerned, that's not a great look for a Christian, depending on how you present it, how you frame it, how you preach it. But to me, a big problem is consistency. And without trying to go off the subject, it's like, do you really, before we as preachers get up and preach the things we preach, I've been guilty of it myself. And it reminds me, I stood in a meeting in 2020 and was preaching in a preacher's meeting in spring. And I say 2020 because this is, kind of in the midst of people trying to get back from COVID and whatever. And I preached in this meeting, and I was preaching in an independent Baptist church, and we stood singing in this independent Baptist church while the hymn was up on the big screen in the church. No hymnals. The music is up on the screen. There's other stuff that gets put up on the screen, which I would say there's not a thing wrong with that. However, and I preached, and I actually brought it up in my preaching. I said, how many of you, because I was actually making the point of people making sure that we magnify the right things and we preach the right things and stay consistent. And I'm like, how many of you or how many of us, I can say at one time I would have preached against that. But again, because of the consistency issue, I'm just like, wait, is that actually against what God says to put words on a screen on the thing? But there's some guys that preach it. It's these guys preaching preference as if it were doctrine. So if it's really doctrine, then live by it, because sound doctrine holds up. Sound doctrine, it stands. But when it's our preference, that's where, to me, we enter into hypocrisy, because literally there was guys that were standing there that were going to preach that were seeing off that screen that just a year ago they were saying that's what liberals do. And I know that's kind of in a way, maybe it's a whole nother subject, but going back,
it's a fair point. No, it's a fair point about just being consistent in everything. So like I said, my main goal is talking about this, but it is relevant. So I'm fine talking about other stuff that's relevant to it, because it's true that there are a lot of places where we make exceptions for things. The thing is, anytime though, when you start making exceptions, you do risk crossing the line into being a hypocrite, because you preach against stuff, you make a big issue about it, but it's my friend, so I'll turn a blind eye when it's my friend doing that. In fact, I'll give an example of where I relate to that. Is I know, having been an evangelist or even as a missionary, that there are things that I see people, if they'll let someone come to their church and preach, that if I was doing that, there's no way I'm ever getting in their pulpit.
Yep.
But because this person's relatively famous, well-known preacher, or they're very talented in singing, they can do whatever they want to.
Absolutely.
And they get by with it.
Yeah, I've seen that as well. I had that very experience. And the funny thing was, it was between me and my pastor, a guy that would not allow me to come as a missionary because I had a television, but that booked my pastor every single year to preach. And, it's just like one of those funny things. But so I would say, but here's another thing. It's being mindful of your influence. When it comes to Facebook, when it comes to things in general, I think about the principle of, I know this can be pretty broad, but the all things, when Paul talks about all things being lawful, but not all things being expedient, that I need to take time to think about, number one, my message. Like if I am preaching against, strongly standing against sin or and as far as I'm concerned, tattoos a super strong preference that it may be. But who knows? I don't know how someone may preach it, but man, I've got to be careful about. I don't think there's anything wrong, perhaps, with me admiring, just being able to admire the accomplishments. I can admire the accomplishments of, leftists. If I just look at maybe a successful businessman, I can admire what he's done without looking and saying, hey, I was seeing the other day that Warren Buffett, I can't remember the millions or billions that he's given to support abortion causes and everything, and other things like that he's involved in. Therefore, I'm never going to be like, oh man, Warren Buffett. But at the same time, I can just say, man, I can admire how he got to where he is. I can admire the fact that he still lives in the same house that he's lived in, for the last 50 years. He goes through the McDonald's drive-through every morning in Omaha, still lives in Omaha. I can admire certain things about a guy, and I think it's that way with athletes, but that doesn't mean, but I can't endorse him. I can't use him and publicly, and especially social media. I've got to be
Well,
mindful.
that's a fair point, and actually brings even another good question. Because, for example, I mean, on the same line, as far as like for Randy Travis, I appreciate his voice as a singer. And
Mhm.
half people listening have no idea what I'm talking about. But
Mark
as a
Taylor.
singer, he has one of the most amazing voices I think I've ever heard. As a human being, he professes to be Christian, but he's never done anything to make me believe it. Even the songs he sings that most people are like, "Oh, that's a really Christian song." Well, I have bad news. He didn't write those. There's a whole other
Right.
guy who writes all those for him.
Yeah.
But all that aside, just because I respect his voice and appreciate his talent that he has, I don't, for example, I don't share his music on my Facebook. I'm careful about that because I don't want it to feel like I'm endorsing the country music and everything, the drinking and the lifestyle and everything he's attached to. I mean, even while professing to be a Christian, the man was found laying in a ditch naked and drunk by somebody who happened to be driving by and found him that morning.
Yeah.
So, I'm not, I guess I understand. I agree with you on the point that I can respect what somebody was good at.
I liken it kind of unto, um, in my part of the country, we were talking earlier about listening to podcasts and stuff, which I do. But I'm old fashioned, so I generally, when I'm in my truck, I generally listen to my radio. And I live in a part of the country to where we do not have like a fundamental broadcasting that comes over the radio. Yeah, I know I could get it on my phone and blah blah blah, but again, my point is that doesn't come on my dial, so I listen to Moody Radio Network. I
Mhm.
listen to other of these more mainstream Christian radio stations. Well, there's guys on there that therefore, since it's on, I'm listening to, and I may be really getting something out of this guy but I could never come. I could talk to you and it's like, man, and be open with you, be like, hey, I heard from this guy because I know that I'm not concerned about influencing you, that you're going to listen to, go hyper Calvinist, listen to John MacArthur or something,
No,
but I'm not going to say that in my pulpit. I'm
no.
not going to, and I'm not even going to endorse certain guys. I may like a lot of what they say, but even so, I think there's the thing of, I just try to be mindful of that. Yeah, personally, you going back to sports, I could admire this player. Um, but I personally am very hesitant to, I guess, promote a certain player.
Mhm.
Uh, but then I say that and I can think of one that I did. Just as I say that, I can think of it at one instance. I don't know if there's been any other, but it was a Greg Maddux pitcher for the Braves. It was some of his just amazing stats.
Right.
But again, it was just Greg Maddux, and uh, I don't know a whole lot about Greg Maddux, but from what I understand, I don't believe he's a you know you know on fire for God kind of Christian guy from what I know. Uh, but I do think you got to think about the company, because so to me, one thing is the consistency of it. Another thing is the fact that I've got to be careful if this is something I'm condemning and this guy portrays that. I mean, especially if it's like right there, and this is something that the guy uh, preaches against. It reminds me of the people that back in the day that they were against going to a movie theater because somebody may see you going in there and maybe you're going to see the latest cartoon or whatever, but they might think you're going to that argument. But then they would go into a video store and rent video. And I'm like, well, you
Right.
can't, you got to be consistent, and to me, that's honestly, and again, I'm not trying to go back to this, even though I guess I sort of am. It's been one of the biggest hindrances in Bible preaching and Bible preaching churches for the last, I don't know how many years, that an honest person can see these inconsistencies. And so you either have people that continue to follow you as a pastor, and I'm not saying just this one thing is this, but it shows a problem to, yes. So either people are going to just excuse it, or people are going to be like, wait a second, now you got all over me or my
Mhm.
kid when they went and got a tattoo, and you got up there and blew it out of the water, and yet you're going to do this. And I believe it calls into question a lot of our other message, to
Mhm.
where, well, he preached against this too. Is that really wrong? And to me, there's, it's not to me. The fact is, in a lot of these situations, we have hurt ourselves by being inconsistent. And I believe the reason that we get inconsistent is that we preach, something that there's a strong principle. There's a strong principle to the where therefore there's a real argument for living it, but we preach it on equal ground with a precept that hurts the message. And to me, that's one of the things that.
Well, I think you're really hitting on something with the inconsistency and how it affects, because in reality, you think about it, why do most kids who grow up in a Christian home eventually turn away? If you ask them, they'll tell you it's because of the inconsistency. It's because mom and dad did this at church, but that at home.
Right.
You talk about people who go to church, grow up in church, but then eventually leave. It's because of the inconsistency. So I really do think that is an issue that we don't appreciate enough how big it is and how much people are paying attention. And that's why I'll even clarify on this, that I think he could probably share this post and be okay, but he needs context.
Yeah.
Now, what I wouldn't do is, if you preach against tattoos, is put a picture of a man with tattoos all over my wall. I don't think there's any amount of context that'll make up for that.
Yeah.
But for example, like you're talking about the athlete, the guy that you shared something for,
Greg Maddox,
you can do that with context. As long as there's nothing in the picture that's a contradiction of what you've been saying, to therefore break the consistency. I think you're like, if you're preaching against drinking and then you got a picture of this guy drinking, and besides it's all his stats, okay,
right.
you've messed up your message. You broke your consistency. But if you're posting just a picture of him and your context is that as an athlete, this guy has done a really good job, look at this, I think you can get by with it to a large degree. Because there's some people who'll never be happy. There's some people who are going to scrutinize at every little thing and be nitpicky about all of it, sure. But most people, if you give a little bit of context, you can get by with a lot. You can get by with a lot of stuff if you'll just give some context of why you're saying this.
Yeah.
My wife and I have had that with Facebook posts that I've had to explain to her a few times. You can share that, but you need to explain why you're sharing that.
Yeah.
Because she'll share something that's right, but it's without context, it becomes rude at some point.
Yeah,
and I've had to help her with that.
Facebook side that, I just think it's really been mindful of our influence. I mean, as pastors, for sure, but as Christians in general, it's just, even I don't know. I'm just trying to think. There could be 100 examples, but and to me, it's not been a hypocrite to, again, admire this particular player, what he does on the field, and yet not want to share it, because there's some people that may listen to this for sure and be like, well, that's hypocrisy. If you're, you ought to be able to be willing to put us. No, it's not hypocrisy, because, again, because you can miss context. I like this guy, or I admire, man, this guy's an amazing athlete. He's amazing at what he's doing. You know what? I want to share this with the world. But then the world isn't necessarily getting the context. Man, I admire what this guy does on the field. They're saying, wait a second, that guy is kind of the epitome of something I heard you preach as far as what I am looking at right now. I am looking at something that you just preached against, or that I know that you preach against, and I know that you are against. And
I think that just brings the third point that I would emphasize, and that's being careful.
Yes.
Which you said mindful, but to be careful of what it is that you're showing, because if somebody represents something you stand against, then you shouldn't, no matter how good they are at something, you have to be careful about praising that. You can't do it.
Yes.
It's going to be inconsistent, no matter how much context you try to give it. It's not going to work. So I really think I've noticed it boils down, from what I've noticed from our conversation, to really those three things, and they all start with a C, so we can alliterate it for everybody. Is you have the consistency, you have context, and you have carefulness.
Yeah. Well, and I just was going to add to that, going back to, again, the Greg Maddox thing in the context, again, I don't regret posting that. There's nothing that I feel like, oh man, I was inconsistent there, because it was showing just the amazing, it was his walk and strikeout record, how that he hardly ever walked anybody. Mm-hmm. And if he did, it was intentional. It was just crazy. It was just remarkable. But being a sports fan, I do like when I can find an athlete or a coach that is truly a consistent Christian, that really loves the Lord, and may not line up with us on everything, but I don't even think of it this way very often. But because you got to be so careful, because man, as soon as see this guy, and maybe he's super outspoken and really he's truly saved and he's truly trying to communicate the gospel, but maybe the fact that he's doing it shirtless or something is not exactly what I'm trying to show my daughter, or something like that. So it's like, it's nice if you can find somebody, Tony Dungy, again, there's different people that it's nice if you can find somebody, but as a general rule, as a parent, I think of things as a parent as well as a pastor, because I don't do a lot of this on Facebook, or even in the church when it comes to an individual. But I think of it more as a parent, but it would apply to social media, is I generally don't find a guy to lift up too much. And especially when I find the guy, because it's happened before, be like, oh, he's a Christian, this will be a good thing. Then all of a sudden you find out that and I think there's legitimate Christians, which could be a whole nother debate, that don't really know what the BLM movement is all about, that ignorantly says, well, of course we believe Black Lives Matter or something, and then endorses that. But you're like, oh man, now this guy that's a Christian is endorsing this. And I told my son, boy, this guy's great. But then my son's like, wait, but he's endorsing this Marxist idea. So I think it's pretty wise not to get too honed in on the players with that too. And if I guess, I don't know if you would let me kind of go off script, just, and we're not on a script. So, but I was thinking just about sports in general, because I know a lot I know there's people for sure that don't agree with sports, Christians being too involved in sports across the board, and I don't know your story, but I can tell you that with me, this would have belonged better in the beginning, but with me, big sports fan before I got saved. I got saved, and man, I was just so engulfed in this new life, the church. I mean, growing up in an area to where you could literally almost every night of the week be in church somewhere. I just totally fell off with this stuff. But when I started working with the youth, I started getting back into it again. And a part of it was to relate to the youth and whatever, but I was genuinely a fan. And more than anything, probably the Carolina Tar Heels is my number one, sport, your team, and then the Braves. And then after that, it's just kind of sports in general. But one of the things that I've seen on the positive side for me, whatever people want to do with it is a cool thing. And it's a cool bond with our family. It's a cool, and for us being North Carolina and Atlanta as well, there's almost a regional thing to it. There's a camaraderie that I enjoy about it. And then if there's another benefit to me being a sports fan, is I don't even know, I am a sports fan, but I may even come off as a bigger sports fan than I am. Because, man, you talk about being able to relate to unsaved people, just having just a general knowledge, just pointing out some ways that it's been beneficial, which doesn't have a lot to do with necessarily what somebody's posting or not posting. But those are a couple of the things or reasons that I enjoy following sports, besides just the thing of it. But yeah.
No, it's fine to mention that, because even that gives me a chance to mention kind of where I stand on it, is that I'm not a fanatic of pretty much anything. It's not just sports; it's pretty much anything. A long time ago, you have to understand, I started preaching. I was 15 years old. I come from a family where I didn't have any real knowledge about Christ, and when I got saved, that just became my life. Preaching was my life. That's who I was. So all those things that I had been a fanatic of to some degree in the past. I was never in the comics, but I really like comic book movies and all that stuff. I step away from that. Now, in general, though, what I do for the same thing you're talking about is I still keep just a basic knowledge of what's going on. It's like, I know that I haven't watched Cowboys game in forever. but I know that they lost and they're out of the playoffs. I have enough. 5 minutes on Facebook's enough to know that.
Yeah.
But I have enough knowledge to know that. I know that they had a good season, better than they've had in a long time. I know that kind of stuff. Because it is nice to have topics you can talk to people about. But me personally, I've always been somebody for most of my Christian life that when it comes to those things, that I know people in general have a habit of getting too much involved in.
Yeah.
To the point where an idea of even discussing this would offend some people. Some of my friends wouldn't even have this conversation with me.
Yeah.
I've just avoided any of those kind of fandoms, any of those things in which you can become a fanatic. I've avoided that.
Yeah.
And I don't necessarily ask everybody to do what I do. That's why I feel like I don't think either of us are to the extreme of this, but we're both on slightly different ends of this where we could talk about it.
Well, I feel like, just complete transparency about it, that I've really had to learn how to be, a Christian sports fan, if that makes sense. Because in the true sense of the word, I do consider myself a fan, but at the same time, I'm not in the true sense of the word a fanatic. But there's
you understand why I use the word fanatic, though. I wasn't attacking
you. Absolutely. But there's definitely, as a Christian, I believe it can be, and this could be a whole nother conversation, but it's something that you have to learn to navigate, because a person like me, for sure, I can get engrossed and I can get over emotional, and I can, get mad at the kids and the wife for just being in a bad mood because my team lost. And, the things that I started having to check myself on early on is when I would go to bed after a loss, especially say a Carolina loss, and I'm laying in bed just thinking about it, almost stewing, or when I'm praying for the win, and it's just like you can see yourself getting drawn in, and you're just like, you know what, this can be done in a healthy way, but you've got to run. There's got to be, I don't know if you'd say checks and balances in there somewhere, but you've got to be able to, because and again, it could almost be somebody be saying, why even do it? Well, again, it's the payoff, the fun, the connection, the fact that to me it's worth the payoff. But I really believe I'm in a good place right now when it comes to but I'll share this with you as a pastor, okay? And this could just totally do away with my argument, but I'm telling you where I am now, not where I was a few years ago. But it's kind of a hilarious thing. There was a guy in our church that came over to watch. I believe he came over to watch like the national championship, or either it was Carolina in the tournament. So it's one and done. If they lose, they're out. But I believe it may have been the championship game. And I want to say, I can't remember what year it was, but I remember the events of the game. I remember that we were down most of the game. We came back toward the end, and we're like, oh my gosh, I think our guy hit a shot with less than 10 seconds to go that put us ahead. The other team got the ball, came down, and like scored at the buzzer, as Villanova, to win the game. And so we literally went from just elation, oh my gosh, we're jumping up and celebrating, to a few seconds later, that guy goes down and hits the shot, and we lost. And I've got like my Roy Williams or Tyler Hansbrough signed, a couple signed basketballs. I chuck it across the room, slap the wall. My son takes off running upstairs crying. And at that point, this dude's sitting there that's not even a sports fan. He's just a single guy that's moved to the area and and here's the pastor acting like a total fool, and the pastor's son running upstairs crying. And so, this is another conversation to be had, but that's a place to where you're just like, okay, maybe that's a little fanatic, and maybe that is not anywhere near how a Christian or a pastor should be having a meltdown, because somebody lost a basketball game.
But the thing is, it is something that needs to be addressed, because that's part of what made me that was one of the things that helped me step back. One is, I began to see, because like I said, I like sports. I never really liked to watch as much, but I had my teams. And so actually the Braves was one of my teams. So
Yeah.
we were on board for that. But I had my teams that I liked, and I had, I had the hobbies and stuff I like that people tend to get engrossed in. This becomes their identity. And one of the things that made me pull back and take a step away from it was the fact that I had so many pastors in my area, because I live right on the Virginia Carolina line. So in that area, you have Carolina Tar Heels, you have Duke, you have Virginia Tech as your big teams everybody's fighting about. And you had churches like the church I was a member of. They were the Virginia Tech team, the church. If you went down the road to the church where Brother David Toller, that you've probably met through some of the stuff where he's at the time, I think they were. I may make a whole church mad if I get this one wrong, but I want to think they were the Tar Heel team at the time, and I'm just saying that because their youth director was. But I'm not sure if the church was Duke.
That
or
is
Tar Heel.
interesting.
Then another one was, and then you think about this. The team Duke is the Blue Devils.
Yes.
And what's Wake Forest? The Demon Deacons. And
Uh-huh.
you're a church who's proud to be identified with the Demon Deacon team,
Or the Devils.
the Blue Devil team, and that kind of
Yep.
stuff. And I stepped back and said, now, wait a minute. I can't be a part of that.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not going to break fellowship with these guys over it, but I can't be a part of that. And I stepped back. And like I said, I did a similar thing. Even I had a pastor friend. I won't say who he is because he's passed away now. That I loved him, but he really was big into like superhero stuff. I mean, he was big time into it, and he helped me to realize I should take a step back from that, because he was so big into it. Like he had watches with the superhero stuff on him and things like that, and it started. You seen it begin to creep into his church to where it began to affect the personality of people. Where people in his church began to be excited to be identified with this. And it's not just superheroes, it's not just sports, but any kind of thing you see, whatever a pastor gets excited about is people get excited about.
That's right.
And so that's why for me with ministry, I just at some point decided, and I know this will sound like a super spiritual answer, but I decided publicly, the only thing I'm going to let people know I'm excited about is Christ. Privately, I can have hobbies and stuff. In general, I'm going to be honest, I don't have that many, but I can have my hobbies. But publicly, I'm not going to post about that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't talk about it. I may know what's going on. I may talk like what you're saying, just have conversations and connection with people. But I just made a decision a long time ago that publicly I'm not going to praise any of those things, because it begins to get people excited about the wrong things, I feel like sometimes.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. And, it is a good conversation, because, you can honestly get to a point to where you can say, I mean, I hate to talk about it like in these terms, but is it worth the risk? If it's that big of a deal, or if it can draw you in that much, it's like, what do you really want? Are you walking in slippery places or something?
Right.
But I don't know, but I do believe that I know there's a balance to it. I'm very understanding of people that, are on your position, on your side, or even further. Yeah, because I think definitely as a Christian, because to me that was the conviction. Then even more as a pastor, being passionate and being into it and really liking it, and liking it a lot is one thing. Enjoying the camaraderie with it, enjoying the whatever, just even if I guess there can even be a camaraderie when you're arguing with somebody, when it's good spirited, it's fun. It's a lot of fun, but yeah, it's just like,
competition is fun to us, and it's okay because competition challenges us and it provokes us to do better. So that's why I'm not against competition. I'm not against finding ways. That's why I like playing sports, is because when you play them, you really get it. So that's why I enjoy that. Like some of the funnest things I've done in ministry was, getting kids out and go and do something. Go have a competition with them.
Yeah.
Because it brings out the best in it. It can bring out the worst in us too, but it can bring out the best in us to compete. And I'm not going to lie. For me personally, I always preferred more contact sports, and it's probably because I'm a big guy. I'm 6 foot. I don't know how much I weigh, but I weigh a lot, and I always have. And I was always big. So, in school, of course, I want to play football. All I have to do is stand up and I knock the other guy down.
Yeah.
Of course, I like boxing or, physical sports like that, because there's not many people you can compare me against who are in my weight class. I have the home field advantage every time. But I know that about myself, that I enjoy those things partially because I like the competition, partially because there's things that, to be honest, in my flesh enjoy some of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's where I think you find anything like that, there's a balancing act. So I'm not picking you on sports when I say that. Anything that you enjoy doing enough to make it a hobby, there's going to be that balance of
Yeah,
where
whether it
is
be
the good
hunting
and
or
where's the bad.
fishing, right? You could talk about the people that hunt, fish, golf,
Absolutely.
which again, that could come back to the very first conversation about, don't be bulldogmatic on fandom in sports if you're spending just as much time and obsession on hunting or fishing or golf, or it's like, find the consistency and the balance. And one thing I think is, could be said too, that honestly, one thing about it, and this doesn't have to be professional or collegiate sports, but just sports in general, the Bible confirms that there's virtue that you can learn from sports. Now, that doesn't mean you have to follow it, doesn't mean you have to get to endorse it, but it's kind of to your point that the illustrations, Paul's using those illustrations because of the virtues you can learn from them. Here's how you got to compete. Here's how the way you live, you got to live disciplined like this athlete would be disciplined. It's like,
Because it's something commendable.
There's virtues to learn from it, but I'm not saying that to say, therefore, you got to be a big fan of, whatever team. But just to say that it's not like, well, sports are evil. It's like, well, no, there's virtue in it, and they can be, but.
That's why I agree. I mean, I agree. It can bring out some good stuff. It can help you in certain ways. It can build connections and so forth. So I'm not against it at all. I just am against a lot of the things that happen, and that's why I mentioned that. And that's why, like I said, I talked to you because I don't really see that in your Facebook. I know you're a fan, but I don't really have anything to comment on about it.
I got a little crazy with the Braves.
But I didn't pay enough attention.
I was almost doing live updates on that. But yeah, during the World Series,
but I'm a firm believer that what you see somebody post about on social media, a lot of times will tell you where their heart is, because that's the thing they feel is important enough to share with people. And if what I see on somebody, for example, to scroll down through your Facebook, I'm pretty sure I have to scroll right good ways to get through all your church posts before I get to a Braves post. And that's probably because of the season, maybe. But
but Carolina, honestly, as much as I love the Braves, I'm a bigger Carolina fan. But no, part of it really is I don't post a whole lot in general. I'm not a guy that's. Again, I guess I'm going to post something that's going to be more church or ministry related or family related. I'm not posting my lunch. I'm not posting my workout. I'm not posting my team. I'm not posting because again, it goes back to, it's not that I've got some huge platform, but for whatever it is.
But you do have influence.
And you would like to use it more in, promoting Christ, promoting the ministry. Even if I don't do very many political posts, but if I do a political post, it's more having to do with a Christian value. Maybe it's something about abortion or something to that effect. Yeah, I just think in general, I almost feel like there's 3 different discussions at least that could have been had with this, and one we've already had, but it's what are you putting on social media? Just being mindful of that.
Well, as well, because you have plenty of friends that you can tell a lot of times what a guy's passion is, what it is based off what he posts. And so, like, I have friends that all they post are sports, all they post are politics. Sadly, some of them, it gets even worse than that. All they post are worldly TV shows and just really awful stuff that it's like, I mean, to be honest with you, if I watched that, I'd be too ashamed to post it.
Yeah.
But yet they post it proudly on Facebook. And that's why I feel like this is something that does need to. This is part 1, I guess, of a conversation. I know as we were talking, I realized maybe I should talk to Brother Scott Matthews, get him involved, because he has some similar points that would be good to hear from him on this.
Yeah.
Talking about where some of his mind changed on some of these things.
That'd be interesting too, because and he's also a big Carolina fan, but I know Brother Scott really well, and that would be interesting.
But he shared some stuff in a message he preached for us about where he realized he was just getting too much into it and had to dial it back a little bit. So he might be a good one to talk about some of this. But it's not just sports, it's celebrities. In fact, actually, if we had more time, I had some other stuff queued up to talk about some celebrity stuff as well. But I know you got to go. We're past time for you to have to leave. So I think we can call it there that we've had a decent conversation about sports and the accountability we have to take about what we share and what we praise, what we heap glory on. Because, I mean, the Bible's clear about not calling evil good and good evil. The Bible's clear about not giving honor where honor's not due.
Yeah.
So I think especially as pastors, we have to take account of that. But I think all Christians and anybody who has any influence at all needs to take account of what we're praising, because we give off mixed messages if we don't.
Yeah. And we're trying to end, but there was another thing that just as I wasn't studying on this, but like literally just this morning, I was just looking over a few things. And I've said this myself, but with Paul's references to sports, he was very familiar to sports. He knew he was in a culture that was sports crazy. He was using the virtues that he could use from these sports. I've heard people say, I've been guilty of myself, but I think I've said it with a caveat, but that Paul was a sports fan. But this would be an interesting conversation as well, because, and I don't know where it would go, but just the fact that Paul, was he really a fan of these nude people out there competing for the glory of their God? Like that's hard to fathom. But then I come back around again, and I know Paul would have been against nudity as much as anybody would. Anyway, but it's just an interesting thing, because then I hear people say, well, if Paul were alive today, he would be a sports fan. And I guess there's no way of saying. Maybe
I think the more fair statement about Paul is Paul knew how to use what people know to give them illustrations.
That's it.
And of course, it's the Holy Spirit speaking, but
yeah, and because I don't believe it's him saying, oh my gosh, did you see, what was going on in the I forget the names of the games that took place in Corinth. Anyway, but Corinth had games, Athens had games, obviously, but but it's a whole interesting thing, because when you actually study what was going on with sports then, it was normally for the glory of a pagan god, and they were generally competing nude, even though in certain ones women weren't allowed to be present, I believe, and historically and things like that in certain of the competitions. But and again, that's a thing too. I just really have questions about some of the cultural things of that day. It almost reminds me, and I'm the one that said I got to go, I know, but it reminds me of, it reminds me of people in 2022 hearing maybe something someone said in 1950, or even our founding fathers, and just some of the issues as far as race or things like that were common. And it's so easy in 2022 to say how you would have felt 100 years ago, or how you would have felt 200 years ago. And it doesn't change what's right or wrong, but it may change the fact that you may say a statement and it not be, you may make a statement 100 years ago that where if you made now, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe someone would say. Just culturally, I think we have a tendency to view culture, no matter when it was, as we look at things today. And
well, that's a conversation I do want to have another day. So that's actually one we could. That's something I really am quite passionate when it comes to history, the way people change it based off today's morals. I would really like to talk about.
Yeah.
Well, then I appreciate you being with us. I appreciate those who've come in to watch this and be a part of it. I hope it has at least stirred some thoughts for people to get them thinking about these things and taking a better consideration of what we do post and what we do praise, because it does matter. I mean, you have to figure it out yourself where you draw lines, but it does matter. So we should be thinking about this stuff. I do remind anybody who's watching the video, of course, always ask you to like, subscribe, because we have these things that we make. We have some kind of video like this, not this exact format, but every Saturday we have something. And then throughout the week, we have multiple live streams as well. So we encourage you to be a part of those. And the best way and easiest way to do it is to do that. So thank you for joining. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you again to Brother Haley for his time. And of course, we'll get him back to talk either more about this or another subject. Seems like you already have some other ideas of what we can talk about. So we'll see how it goes. But thank you again for your time, brother. And we'll go ahead and close out.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it.